February 10th, 1945, 10:47 a.m., above the Luzon Strait. Captain Lewis Edward Kurdes, a 25-year-old ace with 10 kills, banked his P-51 Mustang on a routine patrol sweep. The morning sun glinted off the endless blue of the Philippine Sea. His eyes, sharpened by combat over 2 theaters, tracked a lone twin-engined aircraft, a C-47 Skytrain, designation Lucky Lady, descending from the south. Its mission, as Kurdes knew from the morning briefing, was straightforward: a mercy dash to Batan Island to rescue a downed P-38 pilot, Lieutenant LaCroix, who was drifting in his life raft just offshore. But as Kurdes watched the transport's serene approach, a primal alarm fired in his nerves. The C-47's nose was pointed not toward the safety of the American-held southern airstrip, but directly at its near-identical twin to the north, a strip carved from the same volcanic rock, running the same east-west direction, but firmly, lethally, in Japanese hands. The C-47's crew, having spotted LaCroix's raft, had turned toward land with urgent hope. But a critical failure sealed their fate. Their radio had died over the water. No warning from ground control could reach them. From his vantage at 3,000 feet, Kurdes saw what they could not. He saw the distinctive boxy shapes of Japanese Type 95 trucks moving on the northern strip's apron. He counted the dark dugout pits of anti-aircraft positions scarring the hillside, and, with a sinking heart, 4 parked fighter aircraft, likely Agile Zeros, on the taxiway. The transport, a slow and unarmed giant, continued its descent, its landing gear now fully extended, like a lamb offering its throat. Inside its cabin sat 12 Americans, including 2 Army nurses. Statistics Kurdes knew too well flashed in his mind. Execution rates for captured airmen here approached 50%. For the women, the fate would be unimaginably worse. The C-47 was not on a rescue approach. It was on a final approach into hell.
10:52 a.m., 500 feet above the Japanese airstrip. Time, which had flowed normally seconds before, now turned viscous and slow. Captain Kurdes' combat instincts screamed for action. He shoved the throttle forward, the P-51's Rolls-Royce Merlin engine answering with a powerful roar, and dove to intercept. Leveling off just ahead of the C-47's nose, he rocked his wings violently, the universal signal to turn away, to abort. The transport's silhouette only grew larger in his canopy. He could see the pilot's face in the cockpit window, a hand giving a friendly, misinterpretive wave. They think I'm an escort. Desperation mounting, Kurdes climbed, rolled, and sliced across the transport's path a second time, so close he felt the turbulence from its props. No response. The C-47, locked on its final approach, descended through 200 feet. Below, the scene became chillingly clear. Japanese soldiers, at least 15, were now running into position along the runway. Some carried stretchers, a cruel pretense of aid. Most held Arisaka rifles, their bayonets fixed. They were not preparing for a rescue. They were preparing for a harvest. In the cockpit of the Lucky Lady, co-pilot Lieutenant Frank Richards felt a surge of relief seeing the Mustang. They were over friendly territory, and a fighter was shepherding them in. He pointed out Kurdes' aircraft to the nurse sitting behind him, Second Lieutenant Helen Warner, who managed a tired smile. She didn't know the pilot, but the sight of the warbird was comforting. Back in his P-51, Kurdes' eyes darted from the soldiers below to his fuel gauge. 15 minutes of flight remained, and back to the transport's left engine nacelle. His mind, trained for split-second decisions, presented him with 2 horrific outcomes. Option 1, let them land. 12 Americans, including Helen, whose name he would learn only later, would be captured. In the Pacific, that was a death sentence, often preceded by torture. The 2 nurses faced a fate so dark it was scarcely discussed in briefings. Option 2. He had the firepower to prevent that landing. 6 500 caliber Browning machine guns in his wings could shred the C-47's engines. but to fire on a friendly aircraft, to become the direct instrument of its destruction, was an inconceivable act, a court-martial offense that defied every rule of engagement. Yet, as the transport's shadow first touched the enemy runway, a terrible clarity cut through the chaos. There was a third, unspeakable option. To save them, he would have to shoot them down.
10:55 a.m., 400 yards behind the C-47. The mental calculations were complete. Every other option had evaporated. Captain Kurdes' hands, steady from hundreds of combat hours, moved with a grim, automatic precision. He pushed the throttle to maintain position, the P-51D's airframe shuddering as he slowed to match the transport's 110-mile-per-hour descent. His target was not the fuselage, but the left engine's cowling, a precise 3-foot-wide circle of aluminum 18 feet from the passenger cabin. A miss by inches could send armor-piercing incendiaries ripping through the fuel lines or the cabin itself. He adjusted the gun sight's reticle, factoring in deflection, lead, and the subtle drop of his half-caliber rounds over distance. The 6 Browning M2 machine guns, loaded with a mix of ball and tracer ammunition, were primed. The C-47 was at 150 feet, its shadow now a crawling stain over the rocky shoreline. Japanese anti-aircraft crews watched but held their fire, confused by the Mustang's position and still expecting a captive prize. Kurdes took a final breath, his finger resting on the trigger. He was not just a pilot anymore. He was a surgeon, performing the most dangerous operation of the war, where the slightest tremor meant death. He squeezed. A thunderous, ripping roar filled his world as all 6 guns fired in unison. Tracer rounds, glowing red, streaked ahead in a converging stream. For 3 interminable seconds, over 400 rounds hammered into the Pratt & Whitney R-1830 engine. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The engine cowling disintegrated into a blossom of shredded metal and gushing black oil. A gout of flame erupted, then was snuffed out as the propeller seized into a frozen, bent position. The C-47, hit by the asymmetric thrust, lurched violently to the right, its wing dipping toward the sea. Inside the transport, the world exploded in noise and confusion. The violent shudder threw crew and passengers against their stracks. The roar of the remaining right engine was drowned by the deafening scream of torn metal and the sudden sickening vibration of the airframe. The pilot, Lieutenant Richards, instinctively fought the controls, his mind struggling to process the attack. They were under fire, but from behind, from an American P-51. For the 12 souls aboard, the terrifying truth was incomprehensible. Their own side was shooting them down.
10:56 a.m., off the coast of Batan. The C-47, trailing a thick plume of smoke from its dead left engine, was mortally wounded but still flying. Lieutenant Richards, a veteran transport pilot, instinctively pushed the remaining engine to its limits and wrestled the yoke to counteract the powerful yaw pulling him toward the sea. The Douglas Skytrain was designed for redundancy. It could fly and even climb on a single engine. Richards's training took over. He adjusted trim, feathered the ruined propeller to reduce drag, and scanned the shoreline ahead. The Japanese runway was now only seconds away, a deadly temptation. He could still attempt a one-engine landing there. In his P-51, Kurdes saw the pilot struggle and understood the horrific calculus. A crash landing on the water offered a slim chance. A landing on that strip meant certain death or a fate worse. He had only seconds to eliminate that option. Banking hard, he came around for a second pass, the smell of cordite still sharp in his cockpit. The C-47 was lower now, at 75 feet, skimming the wave tops. Aiming was harder, the margin for error gone. He lined up on the starboard engine, his remaining ammunition less than 800 rounds, all that stood between 12 Americans and captivity. He fired. The second burst was shorter, more precise. Tracers converged on the right engine's cowling. Metal sparked and tore. The propeller slowed, then stopped, windmilling uselessly. A deep silence fell over the C-47 as the last engine died, replaced by the whistle of wind over a crippled airframe. The aircraft was now a 14-ton glider with no power, no altitude, and only one direction to go: down. Richards, realizing the runway was impossible, did exactly what Kurdes had hoped. He pushed the nose forward, trading the last vestiges of altitude for precious airspeed to maintain control, and aimed the shuddering aircraft for the only open space available, the rolling swells of the Luzon Strait. The Japanese soldiers on the beach watched, stunned, as their prize splashed into the sea 200 yards offshore. The impact was a colossal explosion of white water, the fuselage slamming flat onto the surface, skipping once, then settling as the wings dug in. For a terrifying moment it seemed the plane would flip, but it remained upright, quickly beginning to sink nose first into the deep channel. 11:03 a.m. The floating wreck. Inside the C-47, chaos reigned but was met with disciplined action. The force of the ditching threw everyone forward, but seatbelts held. Seawater immediately surged through cracks in the fuselage, its icy shock a brutal awakening. "Everybody out, now," Richards yelled, unbuckling and shoving the cockpit escape hatch open. In the cabin, the crew, though battered and confused, reacted with trained efficiency. The two nurses, Helen Warner and her colleague, were already moving, helping a dazed radio operator toward the rear emergency exit over the wing. Within 60 seconds, all 12 occupants were scrambling out onto the sinking plane's high right wing, the left wing already dipping underwater. They gasped at the sight. There, bobbing in his yellow life raft just 400 yards away, was the man they had come to rescue, Lieutenant LaCroix, who had witnessed the entire unbelievable spectacle. As they inflated their life vests and grabbed floating debris, they heard the roar of an engine. Kurdes' P-51 shot low overhead, wings waggling in a final salute. He had delivered them from one hell into another, but they were alive, together, and for the moment, free. The water was warm, but the Japanese patrol boat already leaving the northern pier was not.
11:05 a.m. The sinking wing. The relative safety of the C-47's wing was a fleeting illusion. With a deep, metallic groan, the aircraft's nose continued its relentless dive, pulling the entire fuselage downward. Seawater, now flooding the cabin, exerted a terrible weight. The left wing, weighed down by its dead engine, vanished completely, causing the right wing, the survivors' precarious raft, to tilt sharply toward the sea. 13 people, 12 from the C-47, and LaCroix in his raft, now tethered to the wreck, clung to the slippery aluminum skin, their fingers turning white with strain. The water, though a warm 78 degrees Fahrenheit, began its insidious work, sapping strength and core body temperature. Captain Kurdes, having ditched his own P-51 after running out of fuel, was now among them, having swum 600 yards through the choppy swell. He took command of the desperate situation. Their immediate threats were trifold: drowning as the wreck sank, being spotted and captured by the Japanese patrol boat now churning toward them from the island, or simply succumbing to exhaustion and slipping beneath the waves unseen. Kurdes organized the group with a quiet urgency. The strongest swimmers were positioned on the outer edges to help anyone who lost their grip. The two nurses and the wounded were placed in the center. All non-essential gear, heavy flight jackets, boots, were discarded to reduce the drag that could pull a person under. Their only hope was to stay with the wreck as long as possible, as it was the only thing an airborne rescuer might spot. But the Japanese boat, a sleek Type 38 patrol craft with a distinctive rising sun on its hull, was now a mile out and closing fast. Its crew had seen the ditching and was coming to collect. Kurdes made the agonizing call: "Everyone into the water. Hold on to the submerged wing struts. Get your heads low. Don't make a sound." One by one, they slipped off the relative safety of the wing and into the ocean,
positioning themselves along the still submerged port side of the fuselage, using the massive wreckage as a shield between them and the approaching enemy. The wing, now empty, rose slightly in the water, a decoy. They were invisible, but they were also one strong wave away from being scattered and lost. The diesel rumble of the patrol boat grew deafening. 11:20 a.m. The hunt. The Japanese patrol boat slowed to idle speed 200 yards from the wreck. For 10 agonizing minutes it circled. Through the churning water, Kurds could see the sailors lining the rails, binoculars scanning. They knew people had survived. The empty life raft tethered to the wing was proof. The boat's captain, methodical and patient, ordered a tighter circle. At 100 yards, the survivors, pressed against the sharp coral-encrusted hull of the C-47, held their breath. A young sailor pointed almost directly at their hiding spot. Kurds prepared to dive, to try to lead them away. But the sailor was pointing at a seabird that had landed on the high wing. The moment passed. The patrol boat completed 2 more circuits, its crew growing frustrated. They shouted to each other, their voices carrying clearly over the water. The captain, likely under orders to patrol a larger sector, finally made a decision. With a shout and a wave of his hand, he ordered the engines ahead. The boat turned its stern to the wreck and began moving away, its wake slapping against the C-47's tail. A collective, silent exhale of relief passed through the survivors. They had won a minute of reprieve. But as the boat faded toward the northern horizon, a new, more profound terror set in. Without the Japanese as an immediate threat, the reality of their isolation was absolute. The wing was sinking faster. They were 40 miles from friendly lines, and Kurdes' emergency radio call, sent with a failing transmitter as he ditched, had been a prayer, not a certainty. As they hauled themselves back onto the last exposed piece of wreckage, now barely afloat, the true enemy revealed itself. The vast, indifferent Pacific, and the creeping, paralyzing chill of hypothermia that promised a slow, silent end.
11:35 a.m. A false calm. The Japanese patrol boat shrunk to a speck on the northern horizon, but Captain Kurdes knew better than to celebrate. The game had changed, but it wasn't over. The enemy now had a confirmed location of a fresh crash site with probable survivors. They would report it, and the hunt would intensify. The C-47's wing, their only platform, was settling deeper with each passing minute. Air trapped in its fuel tanks, bubbling out in sporadic, agonizing gulps. Kurdes ordered everyone back onto the slanted, slippery surface. The immediate plan was simple. Stay afloat, stay together, and stay silent. Lieutenant LaCroix, the man they had originally come to rescue, proved invaluable. From his raft he had salvaged a small medical kit and, crucially, a sealed tin of emergency rations, hardtack biscuits, and chocolate. Kurdes rationed it out. 1 small piece of chocolate per person, a sip of water from a single canteen. It wasn't sustenance, it was a psychological lifeline, a token of hope. They used a piece of polished aluminum from the wreck as a signaling mirror, scanning the empty sky. Every distant engine noise, and there were a few, high-altitude specks of bombers heading elsewhere, made hearts race. But the silence between sounds was worse, filled with the slap of waves and the creeping dread of what lurked beneath. Sharks were common in these waters, drawn by the scent of fuel and blood from minor cuts. 12:05 p.m. The hunter returns. The telltale diesel rumble returned, but this time it came from the east. Not 1, but 2 smaller, faster boats, likely Daihatsu-class landing barges converted for patrol, each mounting a machine gun. The Japanese were conducting a coordinated search grid. The survivors slid back into the water without a word, resuming their positions along the submerged fuselage. The boats were methodical, sweeping in parallel lines, their crews probing the water with long poles. One barge passed so close that Kurdes, hiding beneath the overhang of the tail section, could see the rivets on its hull and hear the casual chatter of the crew. A pole thrust into the water near a nurse's leg, missing an inches. She stifled a gasp. For a full 20 minutes, the boats crisscrossed the area. The survivors, shivering from cold and fear, clung to the wreck, their muscles screaming. Just as the strain became unbearable, the boats converged on a piece of floating debris, a seat cushion from the C-47, 100 yards away. Mistaking it for a body, one boat hauled it aboard. After a brief animated discussion, the two vessels turned and sped back toward Batan, apparently satisfied they had recovered all there was to find. The survivors, once more, were left alone with a sinking wreck and a dwindling hope. But as they watched the boats disappear, a new chilling realization dawned. The Japanese had called off the active search. They now believed there were no survivors. From the enemy's perspective, the case was closed. But from the perspective of 13 people clinging to life in a vast ocean, this meant the chance of an American rescue had just become their only thread of survival. A thread as thin as the static-filled emergency transmission Kurdes had sent hours before.
12:41 p.m. A sliver of steel. Hope was a physical weight, as heavy as the seawater in their boots. For over an hour, the survivors had watched the empty horizon, their world reduced to the groaning metal of the sinking C-47 and the endless, indifferent sea. Then Lieutenant LaCroix, his eyes perpetually scanning from his raft, saw it. "There," he hissed, pointing a trembling finger southeast. A thin, dark sliver broke the surface 400 yards away. A periscope. It lingered for 3 heartbeats, a silent, unblinking eye surveying the scene, then vanished beneath the waves. A silent terror gripped the group. Was it American or Japanese? Both sides' submarines prowled these waters. An American boat meant rescue. A Japanese boat meant capture, or worse, a torpedo aimed at the wreck to erase evidence. Captain Kurdes, his mind racing, made a decision. He took the signal mirror from Richards's shaking hands. They had one chance to signal their identity. As the periscope broke the surface again, closer now, Kurdes angled the mirror, catching the sun. He flashed the universal distress signal. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The dots of light danced across the water toward the submarine's eye. The periscope didn't move. It seemed to stare back. Then it slowly submerged and did not reappear. A crushing silence followed. Had they been seen? Had they just signaled their position to the enemy? 12:53 p.m. The sea parts. The answer erupted from the ocean 200 yards away. With a roar of compressed air and a churning maelstrom of white water, the bow of a massive submarine breached the surface, followed by its sleek black conning tower. Water cascaded off its deck as it leveled out. There, clear as day on the side of the sail, were the alphanumeric markings SS-391. It was the USS Pomfret, a Gatto-class fleet submarine. Deck crew swarmed out of the hatches before the vessel had fully settled, throwing lines and preparing a rubber dinghy. Commander Maurice Ferrara, Pomfret's captain, had intercepted Kurdes' garbled distress call and had been searching silently for over an hour. The rescue was executed with breathtaking Navy precision. The strongest survivors swam to the lines. The dinghy ferried the nurses and the exhausted. Within 7 minutes, all 13 shivering, oil-stained figures were hauled onto the slick deck. Kurdes, the last to climb aboard, looked back as the C-47's tail section gave a final gurgle and disappeared forever. Just then, the radar operator's voice echoed from the bridge. "Surface contact, bearing north, closing fast. It's that patrol boat." Without a word, the deck cleared. The hatch slammed shut. The dive klaxon blared. As the Pomfret slipped beneath the waves, taking the survivors into its steel belly, the Japanese boat arrived to find nothing but an oil slick and a few lonely pieces of flotsam.
For the first time in hours, the 13 Americans were safe, dry, and speeding silently away from the nightmare, deep beneath the very sea that had almost claimed them.